She had been married for exactly 3 years, 4 months, and 11 days. And in all that time, her husband had never once looked at her the way he looked at the letter in his hand right now. She stood in the doorway of his study, a tray of tea trembling slightly in her grip, and watched his cold gray eyes soften over words written by someone else, someone who was not his wife. The firelight caught the edge of the paper, illuminating the elegant script, and Alara felt something inside her chest crack open. It was not a loud sound. It was silent. It was the sound of hope finally giving up. Lord Aldrich Vane, the Duke of Thornwood, did not notice her standing there. He never noticed her standing anywhere. She was as invisible to him as the furniture, as the drapes, as the very air he breathed. She had spent 3 years trying to become something he might see, something he might want, and she had failed so completely that she no longer knew who she was without the effort of trying. The tray grew heavy in her hands. The tea had long since gone cold, but she could not make herself move. She simply watched her husband read his letter, watched the corner of his mouth twitch with something that might have been a smile, and she understood with devastating clarity that she had been waiting for love that would never come. She turned and left without a sound. He never looked up. Alara carried the tray back to the kitchen, her movements mechanical and precise. She set it down on the wooden table where Cook was rolling dough, and the older woman looked at her with an expression that was far too knowing. "He did not want it, Your Grace," she asked gently, and Alara shook her head, unable to speak. If she opened her mouth, something terrible would come out, something like a sob or a scream or the truth. And the truth was that she was exhausted. She was exhausted in her bones, in her soul, in the deepest parts of her heart that she had guarded so carefully for so long. She had married the Duke of Thornwood because her family needed the alliance, because her father's debts had threatened to swallow them whole, and because Aldrich Vane had needed a wife who would not ask questions. He had made that clear on their wedding night. He had stood across the bedchamber, his hands clasped behind his back, his eyes fixed on a point somewhere above her head, and he had said, "This is a marriage of convenience. I will provide for you, I will protect your family, and I will never mistreat you. But I cannot offer you more than that. My heart is not available." At 19 years old, Alara had believed she could change his mind. She had believed that kindness, patience, and quiet devotion could soften even the hardest of hearts. She had spent 3 years being the perfect wife. She learned his preferences, managed his household with grace, never complained, never demanded, never asked for anything he was not willing to give. She wore the colors he liked, arranged the flowers he preferred, entertained the guests he invited, and stood silently by his side at every social function, a beautiful ornament that no one ever truly saw. And in return, he had given her exactly what he promised: provision, protection, politeness, and absolutely nothing else. The letter in his study had been from Lady Rosalind Ashby. Alara knew this because she had seen the seal before, had seen the way Aldrich's fingers lingered over the wax imprint of a rose, had heard the servants whisper about the woman he had loved before duty forced him to marry someone else. Lady Rosalind was beautiful, accomplished, witty, and everything Alara was not. She was also married now, to a wealthy baron in the north, but her letters still came regularly, and Aldrich still read them with the same tender expression he had never once turned toward his wife. Alara had spent 3 years competing with a ghost, and she had lost. The next morning she woke early, as she always did, and stood before her mirror for a long time. Her reflection stared back at her with tired brown eyes, honey-colored hair pulled back too tightly, a gown of pale blue that did nothing for her complexion. She looked exactly like what she was, a duchess who had been chosen for her lack of demands, her manageable family, her willingness to disappear into the background of a powerful man's life. She had become so good at disappearing that she had almost ceased to exist, even to herself. Something shifted inside her that morning. It was not dramatic, it was not loud. It was simply the quiet realization that she could not continue like this. She could not keep pouring her heart into a man who did not want it, could not keep hoping for a love that was never meant for her, could not keep waking up every morning and breaking her own heart all over again. If Aldrich Vane did not want her love, then she would stop giving it, not out of anger, not out of spite, but out of survival. She had to protect what was left of herself before there was nothing left at all. She began that very day. When Aldrich came down to breakfast, she was already seated, her plate half empty, her eyes on the newspaper she had requested be delivered to her each morning. She did not rise to pour his tea. She did not ask about his sleep, his plans, his comfort. She simply nodded in acknowledgement and returned to her reading. Aldrich paused for half a second, a flicker of something passing through his gray eyes, but he said nothing. He sat down, poured his own tea, and ate in silence. The silence was different now, though. It was not the comfortable quiet of two people who had nothing to say. It was the heavy stillness of a woman who had decided to stop filling the emptiness with her own words. The change was subtle at first, so subtle that Aldrich did not notice it consciously, but something in the back of his mind registered the shift. Alara no longer sought him out during the day. She did not appear in his study with tea, did not ask if he needed anything, did not linger in doorways hopping for a moment of his attention. She was simply elsewhere. She had begun spending her mornings in the village, visiting the families who worked the Thornwood estate, listening to their concerns, offering what help she could. She had always been kind to the tenants, but now she threw herself into their lives with a dedication that surprised everyone, including herself. She helped deliver a baby, organized a school for the children, sat with the elderly, and listened to countless stories of love and loss and survival. And in giving her energy to others, she found something she had been missing for a very long time: purpose. She also found a friend. His name was Mr. Thomas Hale, the village physician, a man of quiet competence and gentle humor who had moved to Thornwood 6 months earlier after the death of his own wife. He was not a nobleman, had no title or fortune, but he had kind eyes and steady hands, and a way of listening that made people feel truly heard. He noticed Alara immediately, not because she was a duchess, but because she was a woman who seemed to be carrying an invisible weight, and he understood what that felt like. They began talking during her visits to the village, first about the tenants' needs, then about books, then about life, and Alara was startled to realize that she looked forward to those conversations. She looked forward to being seen. Aldrich noticed her absences eventually. How could he not? The house felt different without her. It felt emptier, quieter, colder. He found himself pausing outside her sitting room, expecting to hear the soft rustle of her embroidery or the gentle murmur of her voice as she spoke with her lady's maid. But the room was often empty now. She was never there. She was always gone, always busy, always somewhere else. And when she was home, she was different. She smiled at him politely, answered his questions with pleasant neutrality, and never lingered. There was no reproach in her manner, no coldness, no anger. There was simply nothing. The warmth that had always emanated from her, the desperate hope that had always flickered in her eyes, had been extinguished so completely that he could not even find the ashes. It bothered him more than he wanted to admit. One evening, about 3 weeks after Alara's quiet transformation began, Aldrich attended a dinner party alone. Alara had sent her regrets, citing a prior commitment in the village, and he had found himself surprisingly irritated by her absence. The dinner was hosted by Lord and Lady Ashworth, and the conversation was the usual tedious blend of politics and gossip. Aldrich endured it with practiced patience, his thoughts drifting repeatedly to his wife. Where was she? What was she doing? Who was she with? He received his answer sooner than he expected. Lord Ashworth, a man of considerable girth and even more considerable love of scandal, leaned across the table with a knowing smile. "Your wife is doing remarkable work in the village, Thornwood," he said, his voice carrying down the table. "I hear she's become quite the angel of mercy. Though I must say I'm surprised you allow her to spend so much time with that physician fellow. Hale, I believe his name is. A widower, you know, quite young, quite handsome." The words landed in Aldrich's chest like a stone. He kept his expression perfectly neutral, years of aristocratic training serving him well, but something hot and unpleasant coiled in his stomach. Jealousy. He recognized it with a start of surprise. He was jealous. He, who had never felt a moment's possessiveness over his wife in 3 years of marriage, was suddenly consumed by the image of Alara laughing with another man, sharing her thoughts with another man, being seen by another man. The realization shook him deeply. He left the dinner early, claiming a headache, and rode home through the cold night with his jaw clenched so tightly it ached. When he arrived at Thornwood Manor, he went straight to her chambers, something he had not done since the earliest days of their marriage. Her maid informed him that her Grace was not yet returned from the village. She was still at the school, apparently, helping to organize a library for the children. The physician had donated several boxes of books. They were cataloging them together. Aldrich felt his hands curl into fists at his sides. He went to his study and poured himself a drink, staring into the fire with unseeing eyes. The letter from Lady Rosalind lay unopened on his desk. He had received it 3 days ago and had not yet read it. He had not even thought about it. His mind was too full of Alara. Alara, who had stopped waiting for him. Alara, who had built a life that did not include him. Alara, who was currently with another man. He did not sleep that night. He sat in his study, listening for the sound of her return, and when he finally heard the front door open at a shockingly late hour, he rose from his chair with the intention of confronting her. But when he reached the entrance hall, he stopped. She was standing in the doorway, removing her cloak, her cheeks flushed from the cold, her hair slightly disheveled. She looked alive. She looked happy. She looked like a woman he had never seen before, and the sight of her struck him so forcefully that he could not speak. She noticed him standing there, and for just a moment, surprise flickered in her eyes. Then it was gone, replaced by that same polite neutrality she had worn for weeks. "Aldrich," she said calmly, "I did not expect you to still be awake. Where have you been?" The question came out harder than he intended, edged with an accusation he had not meant to voice. Alara's expression did not change. "In the village. I told you this morning. The children's library is nearly finished. It is past midnight. Yes, we lost track of time." She said it so simply, so guilelessly, that he felt ridiculous for his suspicion. But the word "we" echoed in his mind like a bell. "We," she had said "we." "Who is we?" he demanded, and this time something flickered in her eyes. Not guilt, not fear, something closer to disappointment. She had hoped for better from him, he realized, and the realization stung. "Mr. Hale and I were cataloging the last of the donations. Several other volunteers were present as well. It was a community effort." She spoke slowly, deliberately, as if explaining something to a child. "Is there a problem?" "Yes," he wanted to say. "There is a problem. The problem is that you do not look at me anymore. The problem is that you have stopped caring. The problem is that I am standing here, drowning in something I cannot name, and you are perfectly calm, perfectly composed, perfectly indifferent." But he could not say any of that. He had no right to. He had spent 3 years building a wall between them, and now that she had finally stopped trying to climb over it, he was angry that she had walked away. He was being unreasonable, and he knew it, and the knowledge made him even angrier. "No," he said finally, his voice clipped. "No problem. Good night, Alara." "Good night, Aldrich." She walked past him and up the stairs, and he watched her go with a hollow ache spreading through his chest. The weeks that followed were a slow, exquisite torture. Aldrich found himself watching Alara constantly, cataloging the changes in her, and each one felt like a small wound. She laughed more now, but never with him. She moved with a confidence she had never possessed before, her shoulders back, her head high, her voice steady. She no longer deferred to him in conversation, no longer sought his approval, no longer seemed to care what he thought at all. And the worst part, the absolute worst part, was that she was not doing it to hurt him. She was not being cruel. She was not being cold. She was simply living her life, and he was no longer a central part of it. He had become peripheral to her existence, and the sensation was unbearable. He began to notice things about her that he had never bothered to see before. The way her eyes crinkled at the corners when she smiled, the graceful curve of her neck when she tilted her head, the soft, melodic quality of her voice when she spoke about something she cared about. She was beautiful. She had always been beautiful, but he had never truly looked at her. He had been too busy looking backward, clinging to the memory of a woman who had chosen another man, nursing a wound that should have healed years ago. He had married Alara while still in love with someone else, and he had punished her for it every single day without ever raising a hand or speaking a cruel word. His indifference had been the cruelest thing of all. The turning point came on a cold December evening, nearly 4 months after Alara had stopped trying. They were hosting a Christmas gathering at Thornwood Manor, a tradition that Alara had always managed flawlessly despite Aldrich's complete lack of interest. This year, however, she had outdone herself. The great hall was festooned with evergreen boughs and holly berries, candles flickered on every surface, and the air was rich with the scent of mulled wine and roasted chestnuts. The guests arrived in a glittering procession of silks and jewels, and Alara greeted each one with a warmth and poise that left Aldrich standing in her shadow. She was radiant. She wore a gown of deep emerald green that brought out the golden flecks in her brown eyes, and her hair was arranged in an elegant cascade of curls that framed her face perfectly. She looked like a duchess. She looked like the woman he should have been proud to call his wife all along. And Thomas Hale was there. He had been invited as a guest, a gesture of gratitude for his service to the village, and he arrived looking far too comfortable in his simple but well-cut evening clothes. He was not a nobleman, but he carried himself with a quiet dignity that drew attention. Several of the ladies whispered about him behind their fans, speculating about his history, his prospects, his intentions. And his intentions, as far as Aldrich could tell, were focused entirely on Alara. The physician did not hover. He did not fawn. He simply positioned himself near Alara throughout the evening, engaging her in quiet conversation, making her laugh, bringing her refreshments when she looked tired. It was all perfectly proper. It was also perfectly obvious. The man was in love with her. Aldrich recognized it with the clarity of someone who had spent months denying his own feelings. Thomas Hale looked at Alara the way Aldrich should have been looking at her for years, with admiration, with affection, with the unmistakable softness of a man who saw something precious and wanted to protect it. The jealousy that surged through Aldrich was so intense it nearly choked him. He stood across the room, a glass of wine untouched in his hand, and watched his wife smile at another man, watched her lean closer to hear something he said, watched her touch his arm lightly in gratitude when he handed her a cup of tea. Every gesture was innocent, but every gesture felt like a knife twisting in Aldrich's chest. He had never felt anything like this before. Not even when Rosalind had announced her engagement to another man. That had been painful, yes, but it had been a clean pain, a wound he could understand. This was different. This was messy and complicated and tangled up with 3 years of regret he did not know how to untie. He spent the rest of the evening in a haze of barely suppressed emotion. He answered questions mechanically, smiled at the appropriate moments, performed the role of gracious host with the skill of a lifetime of practice. But inside, he was falling apart. He kept replaying moments from the past 3 years, moments he had barely noticed at the time. Moments that now seemed freighted with significance. Alara bringing him tea on cold evenings. Alara remembering his preferences, his dislikes, his habits. Alara standing by his side at every tedious social function, never complaining, never asking for anything in return. She had given him everything and he had given her nothing. And now she had stopped giving. And he was terrified that it was too late. The guests departed shortly before midnight, their carriages rolling away into the winter darkness, and Aldrich found himself standing alone in the great hall, surrounded by the fatting warmth of candlelight and the lingering scent of evergreen. Alara was somewhere in the house, probably already retreating to her chambers, probably already putting distance between them. He could not let her go, not tonight, not without saying something. He did not know what he would say, did not know if he had the words for the emotions that were tearing him apart, but he could not endure another night of this silence. He found her in the library of all places. She was standing before the fire, still in her emerald gown, her back to the door. She looked smaller than she had all evening, the confidence she had worn like armor now set aside, and something about the vulnerability in her posture made his heart clench painfully. She turned when she heard his footsteps, and her expression shifted from surprise to wariness to something that looked very much like exhaustion. "Aldrich," she said quietly, "it is late. Should you not be resting?" "I could not rest." He stepped into the room, letting the door close behind him. "I need to speak with you." She waited, her hands clasped before her, her face unreadable. She had become so good at hiding her feelings, he realized. She had learned that from him, perhaps. The thought filled him with shame. "I saw you tonight," he began, his voice rougher than he intended, "with Mr. Hale." Something flickered in her eyes. "He is a friend, nothing more." "He looks at you as though you are much more than a friend." Ilara was silent for a long moment. Then she sighed, a soft, weary sound that seemed to come from somewhere very deep. "And if he does, what concern is that of yours? You made it clear long ago that my heart, my life, my choices were my own. You wanted a marriage of convenience. You have won. I have never given you cause to doubt my fidelity, nor will I, but my friendships are not your concern." The words were measured, reasonable, utterly devastating. She was right. She was absolutely right. He had no claim on her affections because he had never wanted them. He had no right to her loyalty because he had never earned it. He had built this distance between them, brick by careful brick, and now he was standing on the wrong side of the wall, pounding his fists against it, and she could not even hear him. "Ilara," he took a step closer, and she stiffened almost imperceptibly. "I know I have no right to ask this, but I need to know. Are you in love with him?" She looked at him then, truly looked at him, and he saw something in her eyes that he had never seen before. It was not anger. It was not sorrow. It was the hollow, aching emptiness of a woman who had spent every tear she possessed and had nothing left to give. "I do not know what love feels like," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I thought I did once. I thought love was patience and kindness and quiet devotion. I thought love was waiting for someone to see you, to choose you, to want you. I waited for 3 years, Aldrich. 3 years I poured my heart into this marriage, into you, and you never even noticed. You never looked at me. Not really. Not the way a man looks at the woman he loves." Her voice cracked just slightly, and she pressed her lips together for a moment before continuing. "So no, I am not in love with Thomas Hale, but he sees me. He talks to me as though my thoughts matter. He treats me as though I am worth his time, and that is more than my own husband has ever done." The words hit him like a physical blow. He actually felt himself recoil, his breath catching in his throat. He wanted to argue, wanted to defend himself, wanted to tell her that she was wrong. But she was not wrong. Every word she spoke was true, and he knew it, and the knowledge was the most painful thing he had ever experienced. "I am sorry," he said, and the words felt pathetically inadequate. "Ilara, I am so sorry." She shook her head slowly. "I do not want your apologies. I do not want your guilt. I wanted your love, and you could not give it to me. That is not your fault. You cannot force yourself to love someone. I understand that now. But I cannot keep breaking my own heart hoping you will change. I have to protect myself. I have to move forward. I cannot live my life as a ghost in my own home." "You are not a ghost." His voice was hoarse, desperate. "You are my wife." "In name only." She met his eyes steadily. "You made sure of that from the beginning." The silence that followed was suffocating. Aldrich stood there, his heart pounding, his mind racing, and for the first time in his life he did not know what to do. He was a duke, a man of power and influence and decisive action. But in this moment, before this woman he had wronged so deeply, he was utterly helpless. He had spent years believing he was the wronged party, nursing his broken heart over a woman who had never been his, while the woman who had given him everything stood invisible before him. He had been a fool, a blind, arrogant, unforgivable fool. "What can I do?" he asked finally, his voice breaking on the words. Tell me what to do and I will do it. Anything, everything. Just tell me how to fix this." Alara looked at him for a long, long moment. Then her expression softened just slightly and she shook her head. "I do not know if it can be fixed, Aldrich. Some things, once broken, cannot be made whole again. I have spent 3 years trying to reach you, and you have spent 3 years pushing me away. I do not know if there is a bridge back from that. Then I will build one." He stepped forward, closing the distance between them, and this time she did not step back. "I will build a bridge, Alara. I will do whatever it takes. I know I have no right to ask for your patience. I know I have no right to ask for anything. But please, please do not give up on me. Not yet. Not when I have only just begun to understand what I am losing." Her eyes glistened with unshed tears, and she turned away, staring into the fire. The flames cast dancing shadows across her face, and Aldrich watched her, his heart pounding so loudly he was sure she could hear it. He had never felt so vulnerable in his life. He had never wanted anything as much as he wanted her forgiveness, her trust, her love. He had wasted so much time. 3 years, she whispered. 3 years I waited. And now, when I have finally found the strength to stop waiting, you decide to notice me. Do you know how cruel that feels? Do you know how much it hurts to finally let go of hope, only to have it handed back to you when it is too late? Is it too late? He moved closer, close enough to feel the warmth of the fire on his skin, close enough to see the delicate curve of her profile. "Alara, is it too late?" She closed her eyes. A single tear slipped down her cheek, catching the firelight like a diamond. "I do not know." The next day, Aldrich did something he had never done before. He canceled all his appointments, cleared his entire schedule, and devoted himself entirely to his wife. He began by learning everything about her life, the life she had built without him. He visited the village school she had helped establish, walked through the library she had organized, spoke to the families she had aided. Everywhere he went, he heard the same thing. "Your wife is an angel. Your wife is a blessing. Your wife has changed our lives." And each word was a reminder of how completely he had failed to see the woman he had married. He found Thomas Hale at the village clinic, tending to a child with a broken arm. The physician looked up when Aldrich entered, his expression wary but polite. "Your Grace," he said evenly, "what brings you here?" Aldrich had come prepared to dislike this man, to see him as a rival, a threat. But standing in the modest clinic, surrounded by the tools of a healer's trade, he saw only a man doing his best to help others. A man who had been kind to his wife when she had needed kindness. A man who had seen her worth when her own husband had been blind to it. "I came to thank you," Aldrich said, and the words came more easily than he expected. "For your service to the village, for your friendship with my wife. She speaks highly of you." Thomas Hale's expression flickered with something complicated. "She is an extraordinary woman. She deserves to be happy." "I know." Aldrich met his gaze squarely. "I intend to spend the rest of my life making sure she is." The physician studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Then we understand each other." That evening, Aldrich returned to the manor and found Alara in the garden, wrapped in a heavy cloak against the winter chill. She was standing before the frozen rose bushes, her breath forming small clouds in the cold air, and she did not turn when she heard his footsteps. He stopped beside her, close enough to feel her presence but not so close that she felt crowded. "I met Mr. Hale today," he said quietly. "He seems a good man." Alara's lips curved in a faint smile. "He is." "He is not as good as I intend to be," Aldrich continued, and something in his voice made her turn to look at him. "I have been a fool, Alara, a blind, prideful, stubborn fool. I married you while my heart was still tangled in the past, and I punished you for it. I told myself I was being honorable, that I was protecting you from a loveless marriage by being honest about my limitations. But I was not protecting you. I was protecting myself. I was too afraid to risk my heart again, and so I kept you at a distance, and I convinced myself that distance was kindness." She listened in silence, her expression unreadable. "But it was not kindness," he continued, his voice rough with emotion. It was cowardice, and I am done being a coward. I am done hiding behind old wounds and old excuses. I am done pretending that I do not feel what I feel. He turned to face her fully, his gray eyes intense. I love you, Alara. I do not know when it happened. I do not know how I did not see it sooner. But I love you. I love the way you care for others. I love the strength you carry so quietly. I love the grace with which you have endured a husband who did not deserve you. And I know I have no right to ask for your love in return. But I am asking anyway. I am asking for a chance. A real chance. A chance to be the husband you should have had from the beginning. Alara stared at him, her breath catching in her throat. Tears welled in her eyes, spilling over before she could stop them. She had waited so long to hear those words. She had dreamed of them, hoped for them, prayed for them. And now that they were here, she did not know what to do with them. She had spent months building walls around her heart, teaching herself to live without his love, and now he was asking her to tear those walls down again. It was terrifying. It was overwhelming. It was everything she had ever wanted. Aldrich, her voice trembled. I am afraid. I am afraid to hope again. I am afraid to believe you, if I let myself love you again and you pull away. I will not. He reached for her hands, holding them gently in his own. I will not pull away. I will not retreat. I will not go back to being the man I was. I swear it on everything I am. You are the most important person in my life, Alara. You have been for a long time. I was just too blind to see it. She looked down at their joined hands, at the contrast between his strong fingers and her slender ones. She thought about the past 3 years, about the loneliness, the rejection, the slow death of hope. But she also thought about the past few months, about the strength she had found within herself, the life she had built, the woman she had become. She was not the same girl who had married him. She was stronger now. She could survive without his love. But she did not want to. She wanted to be loved by him. She had always wanted that. I do not know if I can trust you, she said honestly. Not yet. Trust must be earned, and you have given me very little reason to trust you. He nodded, accepting her words without argument. Then let me earn it. Let me prove to you, day by day, that I am worthy of your trust. Let me show you the man I should have been all along. She was silent for a long moment, searching his face for any sign of insincerity. She found none. His gray eyes were open, vulnerable, filled with an emotion she had never seen there before. Hope. He was hopping, just as she had hoped for so long. Very well, she said softly. But know this, Aldrich, I will not go back to being invisible. I will not shrink myself to fit into your life. I have found my own purpose, my own strength, my own voice. If you want me, you must want all of me, not just the convenient parts. I want all of you, he said, and the intensity in his voice made her shiver. Every part, every thought, every dream, every flaw, I want everything. And so began the slow, careful, beautiful process of rebuilding. Aldrich courted his wife with a dedication that surprised everyone, including himself. He brought her flowers from the greenhouse, not the hothouse roses he had ordered by rote for years, but the wild flowers she had mentioned liking once in passing years ago. He remembered. He remembered everything now. He attended the village functions she organized, standing quietly at her side, learning the names of the tenants, offering his support. He read the books she mentioned, discussed them with her over dinner, asked for her opinions, and actually listened to her answers. He wrote her letters, long, heartfelt letters that he left on her pillow, filled with all the words he had never been able to say aloud. And slowly, tentatively, Alara began to open her heart again. It was not a dramatic transformation. It was a gradual thawing, a series of small moments that added up to something significant. She began to seek him out during the day, not with tea and desperate hope, but with genuine interest. She began to share her thoughts with him, her dreams, her fears. She began to laugh at his jokes, to tease him gently, to touch his arm in passing. Each gesture was a gift, and Aldrich treasured every one. The first time she told him she loved him again was on a spring evening, 6 months after his confession in the garden. They were walking through the estate grounds, the air soft with the scent of blooming apple blossoms, and she stopped suddenly, looking up at him with an expression he could not quite read. Aldrich, she said quietly, I love you. His heart stopped. He stared at her, barely daring to breathe. Alara. I have loved you from the beginning, she continued, her voice steady but soft. I tried to stop. I tried to protect myself, but I could not. My heart has always been yours, even when I thought you would never want it. She smiled, a tremulous, beautiful smile. I am glad I was wrong. He pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly against his chest, his face buried in her hair. He could not speak. He could not find the words for the overwhelming emotion that flooded through him. Joy, relief, gratitude, love. So much love that it felt like his heart might burst from the sheer force of it. I will spend the rest of my life making you glad, he whispered against her hair. I swear it. They stood like that for a long time, wrapped in each other's arms, surrounded by the fragrance of apple blossoms and the gentle sound of birdsong. And when they finally pulled apart, Alara looked up at him with eyes that were no longer shadowed by loneliness. They were bright, warm, alive with hope. I believe you, she said. And she did. The months that followed were the happiest of Alara's life. The manor that had once felt like a prison now felt like a home. Aldrich was by her side constantly, not out of obligation but out of genuine desire. He had become her partner, her confidant, her closest friend. They worked together on projects for the estate, discussed politics and philosophy late into the night, traveled to places she had only dreamed of visiting. He introduced her to his friends proudly as his equal. He defended her against any hint of criticism, supported her endeavors with enthusiasm, and looked at her with an expression of such open adoration that it made her blush even after all these months. Thomas Hale eventually moved to another county, taking a position at a larger hospital. Before he left, he came to say goodbye, and Alara embraced him with genuine affection. Thank you, she told him, for seeing me when I needed to be seen. He smiled, a gentle, knowing smile. You did not need me to see you, Your Grace. You needed to see yourself. I simply held up a mirror. He glanced at Aldrich, who stood nearby, and nodded in acknowledgement. Take care of her. Always, Aldrich said, and meant it with every fiber of his being. Lady Rosalind's letter stopped arriving, not because of any dramatic confrontation, but because Aldrich simply stopped responding. He realized with the clarity of hindsight that he had been clinging to a fantasy, a memory of a woman who had never truly been his. The real woman, the woman who had stood by his side through 3 years of cold indifference, was worth more than 1,000 fantasies. He wrote Rosalind one final letter, brief and polite, wishing her well and explaining that he was focusing on his marriage. Then he closed that chapter of his life forever. The winter after their reconciliation, Alara discovered she was with child. She told Aldrich on Christmas morning, handing him a small box containing a pair of tiny knitted booties. He stared at them for a long moment, his face frozen in an expression of stunned disbelief, and then he looked up at her with tears streaming down his cheeks. Truly, he whispered, his voice breaking. Truly, she confirmed, her own eyes glistening. He pulled her into his arms, laughing and crying at the same time, and Alara felt a joy so complete, so overwhelming that she could hardly breathe. This was the life she had dreamed of. This was the love she had fought for. This was the happiness she had nearly given up on. Their daughter was born in the height of summer, a perfect, healthy baby with her mother's honey-colored hair and her father's gray eyes. They named her Hope because that was what she represented. Hope for the future. Hope for their family. Hope that even the deepest wounds could heal with time, patience, and love. Aldrich was a devoted father, as devoted as he had become a husband. He spent hours holding his daughter, singing to her in his deep, rumbling voice, marveling at the miracle of her existence. And every time he looked at Alara, his eyes were filled with a gratitude so profound it made her heart ache. I almost lost you, he told her one night, as they sat together watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and rose. I almost lost you, and I did not even realize what I had until it was nearly gone. "But you did not lose me," she said, leaning her head against his shoulder. "I am here. I have always been here." "I know." He pressed a kiss to her hair, "and I will never take that for granted again." The years passed, bringing with them joys and sorrows, triumphs and challenges. They had 2 more children, a son and another daughter, and the manor echoed with the sounds of laughter and running feet. Alara continued her work in the village, expanding her efforts to include a small hospital and a fund for widows and orphans. Aldrich supported her in everything, using his influence and resources to amplify her impact. Together, they built a legacy not just of wealth and power, but of compassion and service. And through it all, their love deepened. It was not the passionate, fiery love of youthful romance. It was something quieter, steadier, more enduring. It was the love of 2 people who had nearly lost each other and had fought their way back. It was the love of 2 people who chose each other, every single day, not out of obligation, but out of genuine, unwavering devotion. On the 10th anniversary of his confession in the garden, Aldrich took Alara back to that same spot. The rose bushes were in full bloom, their fragrance filling the evening air, and the setting sun cast a golden glow over everything. He took her hands in his, looking down at her with the same intensity she remembered from that night, so long ago. "I loved you too late," he said quietly. "That is the greatest regret of my life. But I have loved you fully, completely, without reservation for every day since, and I will love you for every day to come, until my last breath, Alara, and beyond." She smiled up at him, her eyes bright with tears, her heart full to bursting. "I know," she said. "I have always known." And she kissed him, there in the garden where their love had finally found its voice, and the world faded away until there was nothing but the 2 of them together, whole, home.